Hi and welcome to my channel. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to cut a shift dress with ruffled sleeves using Ankara fabric, and I'm also going to show you how I use the hanging lining method to achieve a finished look on the inside of this shift dress. Okay, so please note that I made some slight adjustments to the style on the thumbnail and the dress that I made. So first, I marked the border line. This is going to serve as the shoulder line also, and all the other vertical measurements I'm going to be taking will start from this point. Okay, so the next thing to do now is to mark the shoulder point. Then you mark the shoulder to waist, you mark your waist to hip, and then you mark your shoulder to hem. So please note that I left ½ inch on the center fold of the back. And this is because sometimes shift dresses just lay better at the back when a seam runs from the top down. So next, measure half of your shoulder measurement. So okay, now before I continue, let me just sharply rule the horizontal point that I marked. So now on the bust line, mark the same thing that you just marked on your shoulder and connect with a straight line. For this dress, I marked 3 inches as the neck width, and for the front neck depth I marked 4 inches, and for the back neck depth I have 1 inch. Okay, so after marking, connect the front and back neckline with your curved ruler. Go down by ½ inch on this line here and connect back to the neck width. Also mark the midpoint of the armhole line. At that midpoint, mark ½ inch in. Okay, so now on the bust line, mark 1/4 of your bust measurement plus 4. Okay, we're adding 4 because it's a free dress. So, and then you add 1 inch seam allowance to that. 1/4 of your waist plus 4 inches, and then your seam allowance. And like I said earlier, if you want it to look exactly like what we have on the thumbnail, just keep the waist shaping entirely. Go straight to the hip. Mark your 1/4 of your hip plus 4 inches, and then add your seam allowance. So at the hemline, measure everything that you have on your hip line, allowance included, and transfer that to the hem. So go ahead to connect all the points, and like I said, for those who skipped the waist shaping, just mark straight, just connect straight from the bust to the hem. So the next thing to do now is to shape our armhole. So connect from the shoulder point to the ½ inch that you marked in earlier, and also into the bust line. So basically we're done cutting the shift dress, so just go ahead to cut, and also remember to slash the midpoint of the back. So moving on, just place the front and back pieces on your lining and just cut the same way. So for the sleeves, I started by drafting a basic sleeve pattern, which I then adapted to make the ruffled sleeve. So this paper has been folded in half, and I have ruled a borderline here. So start by measuring your cap length, and 4.5 to 5 inches is good. So I use 5 inches here for this sleeve, and just roll down and also roll across. Then take the measurement of your elbow length and your sleeve length, wherever you want that to stop. So on this line, mark half of your armhole measurement, and for me I have 9 because my armhole measurement is 18. So the next thing to do now is to connect this point up here as shown. Just connect from here to there as shown. So measure what you have on this slant line and divide that by 4. So I have 10.25 on the line, and I got about 2.56 something after divided by 4, and which I rounded up to 2.6. Okay, so I marked that 2.6 from the top, and I'll keep marking 2.6 until I get to the other side of this line. We are going to have 3 points altogether. So next, raise the first point by 0.5 and lower the other point by 0.5 also. So with your curved ruler, just connect from the top that you raised to this point, and then from there also connect into the point that you lowered. So on the elbow line, mark half of your round elbow divided by 2 plus 1 inch seam allowance. Then also go to the hem of your sleeve, mark your wrist divided by 2 plus the seam allowance. I want to give you a tip to ensure that when you're sewing your sleeve to the dress, you don't have any issues. So what I do is to take the armhole of the dress or the bodies, whether drafted on paper or straight on fabric. So you just want to use the armhole to check what you have on the sleeve pattern. You can either measure or just place it as shown. If everything looks nice, then you don't need to add or reduce the armhole on the sleeve pattern. If not, you just adjust as required. So the next thing to do is to connect from the underarm point here to the elbow and then to the wrist, and then you go ahead to cut. Measure down to where you want the ruffle to start, and I mean where you want the flounce or your flay to start from. So for me, I just wanted to start from my normal short sleeve length. So I marked 8 inches down, and then you go to the other side of your sleeve, and measure 5 inches up, or whatever you want the length of the flay to be. And then from these 8 inches here, shape down to meet the 5 inch that you marked. So you can shape this however you want, and just cut out following the shape that you drew. And I'm going to be discarding this because we don't need it anymore. So next, pin the sleeve to your fabric and cut. And I've also gone ahead to cut the lining. Okay, so next, measure what you have in here after cutting out that part. Okay, so whatever you have is what you'll be using to cut the flay or the flounce, whatever you want to cut it that you're going to use to make the ruffle. For me, it's 23 inches. So moving on, I folded my fabric into 4 in preparation for cutting the flounce. And when I want to cut a flounce, this is how I calculate it. Subtract 1 from your circumference, the circumference you're working with, whatever that figure is, and then you divide by 6. Because this is a ruffle and it's going to have some pleating, so first I multiplied the 23 inches that I measured round the shape by 2. But if you want it to be fuller, you can multiply by 3 or 4 or even more, so that you have more than enough fabric to pleat and you have that volume you're looking for. So 23 times 2, that's 46, minus 1, that's 45. So 45 divided by 6 gave me 7.5. So now that 7.5 is what I marked as the radius, or whatever you arrive at is what is going to be your own radius. So after that, you mark the length you want for your flounce or your flay. So mine is 6 inches, and feel free to mark your desired length, if you want the high-low effect to really show. So when you're done, mark ½ inch above this line, and this is for your seam allowance. Okay, so then cut out all the pieces, and you can slash if you want. Now it's time to sew. So lay the lining piece of the neckline of the front right sides together and pin. Sew with ½ inch seam allowance and do the same for the back. So I have sewn the lining to the neck for both the back and the front. Then just back stitch the neckline. Okay, so pin the side of the dress together, both sides, and sew with ½ inch seam allowance. So now that I have sewn the side, the next thing to do is to sew that back center line. I'll just sew by ½ inch or so all the way to the hem, but I'll leave an opening here so that it's easy to wear this shift dress with whatever hairstyle I have. And if you want to attach a zip, you can also just go ahead to attach your zip normally. So I have measured the 5 inches down and from the top, and you can do more if you like. And also I left that 5 inch part unsewn. So now I have sewn the sides and also the back the way I explained it to you. So what you want to do next is to take one side of the back lining, flip it as shown, and pin it to the main fabric. So just pin and stop somewhere below the 5-inch opening that you left. Also do the same thing on the other side, and please remember that you are sewing along the seam allowance. Okay, you're not sewing to the main dress, you're just sewing this lining to the seam allowance. So next, I cut a 2-inch long and 1-inch wide piece of fabric, which I used to create the button loop closure. I'm going to fold this over and sew it. This button loop, I'm going to insert it into the other side of the lining before I pin and sew it. After pinning, stitch with almost 1/2 inch, and after stitching, when you turn it out, this is what you will have. Everything is going to look nice inside and out. Okay, so moving on now, from the point you stopped before, you are going to join the rest of the lining all the way to the hem. We're doing it this way because this is a hanging lining. After joining, here's what you're going to have. I'm going to put a press button or a round button on this side to fasten it. So now it's time to sew the sides of the lining together also. So just pin the sides of the lining and the same way you did for the main fabric, and then you sew. So now that we are finished sewing the lining, let's also sew the shoulders together. Grab the front and the back shoulder of the dress, make sure it's aligned at the neck point, that is this joining here. Make sure that both are aligned. So now stitch along the top with 1/2 inch seam allowance, and after sewing, everything is going to look nice like this. You're not going to see any joining outside or inside the dress. I put a basting stitch round the armhole, and this makes it very easy to sew through all the layers of fabric when attaching the sleeves. You can always take out the basting stitch when you're done sewing. Sew the sleeves separately. You sew the main fabric for your sleeve separately, and also the lining separately. When you finish sewing both pieces, you turn inside out. You now put the lining inside the sleeve on the outside. Don't make sure that the stitching is not showing out here. Okay, so you can also use a basting stitch to hold the sleeve together. So to attach to your shift dress, you notch the top area of the sleeve like this, and then you put it right sides together with the shift dress. You make sure that you align the shoulder joining to the notched part of the sleeve, and also you make sure that you match up the armhole joining of both the sleeves and the dress. So pin all round and sew everything together, and you see why the basting stitch makes it very easy to pin and also to join the sleeve to the dress. I have joined the sleeve to the dress, and next thing to do now is to join the flounce or your flay to the sleeve itself. Lay the lining and the fabric right side together and finish the hemline. After that, make sure that you iron it very well. Mark the midpoint of the flounce and notch it, and also notch the sleeve itself. So just pin the flounce to the sleeve and pleat. You can pleat as you join, or just pleat first, pin down, and sew everything up. So here's what the finished look of the sleeve looks like. Like I said, you can make yours as long and as wide as you want. So I want to show you a variation of this sleeve that I found after making this dress. So it's basically the same method. The only difference here is that you start with a bell sleeve, then you can cut out the flounce the way we explained in this video. So thank you so much for watching this tutorial. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hardly make clothes for myself, so I'm very happy that I made this for myself. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Please drop your comments below, your suggestions, your questions, and I'll see you in the next one.